All right. Hello, everyone. My name is David Ruck. I'm here at the University of Maryland in Baltimore, Maryland, and welcome to Cytometry and R. So today we're going through one of the other pre-course walkthroughs, specifically the Getting Help tutorial, which we will mention the different ways that you can go and get additional feedback, additional help, anything that you may be encountering as you're working through the different actual lessons in the Cytometry and R course, because I realize a lot of you will be at institutions where you'll be the only person doing this, so we want to make as many options as far as how to go and get additional help when you encounter a barrier that you just can't troubleshoot yourself. And with that, all right, so at this point of the course, I assume you have gone through most of the other pre-course walkthroughs. So you would have set up your own GitHub account, you would have installed the software needed for the course, and you'd have at least scanned through the Positron and Git and Corto walkthroughs just to get some general familiarity with some of the infrastructure we'll be using throughout the course. So for this one, at this point, this is our very first year offering the course. So although we'll try to answer as many questions as we can during the live stream, we realize that many of you will be working in R after the fact, and there may be additional questions that come up. So this was one of those things when I was first learning back in 2020, I didn't have other people to rely on, and this was before large language models where I could have asked and queried things. So a lot of what I had to do to figure things out was looking up information that was already online in terms of either Reddit posts or Stack Overflow posts. However, thanks to however many the many people who have signed up for the course, we have a large set of people who know flow cytometry to different extents, who also are predominantly with no to little coding experience. So to our knowledge, there has never been this many cytometrists trying to learn R at the same time. So we want to take advantage of this, and this is one of those reasons we're using the GitHub discussion page kind of as a community forum, so that if you have an issue, you can check the GitHub community forum, be able to see if somebody else has had that same issue, and if not, open up a new thread, and that way I can come in and see what's your issue, which options we can have to help troubleshoot you through it. So there's a couple different avenues as far as going and getting help, as well as getting feedback from us as the course instructors, because we also realize this is a virtual format, it's an online format. You don't have a lot of those same access that those who are attending in person here in Maryland would in terms of getting help and getting additional feedback. So in this pre-course walkthrough, I'm just going over a couple of the options of how to get familiar with both the discussion forum, as well what the process to submitting those optional take-home problems in the terms of a pull request. So for the discussion forum, as I've mentioned, we're using it as our community forum. It'll help with the just general sense of community for those who are participating online. It will facilitate being able to ask the questions. It is in a searchable format, so if you have a question and you don't know if it's already been asked, you can use the little search bar to pop it up and be able to see is it actually working for you, as well as it also will be Google indexed at one point. So if somebody's taking the course long after we have finished up and they're just like trying to figure out information after the fact, those search terms will be pulling up from the discussion page, which should hopefully help them get through whatever they're encountering at that same point in time. And then also, as a community forum, there can be additional things. So if you want to be able to discuss things in greater depth, you can open a thread to do so. If you just want to show off a very pretty plot that you put a lot of effort into and have customized and you think is pretty cool, this is a place that you would be able to celebrate your wins as well as just commiserate about all the different warnings that you might encounter. So the community forum as itself is what we make of it throughout the course. So I'm excited to see, based on just the first 2 weeks, how this will progress over the next few weeks. So if you're trying to figure out where to go, it's on our course GitHub repository. And then if you're looking at the course GitHub repository, you'll see there's this little tab called Discussions. So this is how you get to the Discussions page. If you're looking at it in terms of the course website, the rendered version where you're going and seeing it, all the different lessons in the actual view, I have a little tab on the upper right that would also directly link you to this page without having to navigate through the GitHub repository. So what we'll be looking through for the first part of this walkthrough is basically we'll just be going through these different tab options we have, and then I'll explain like different options that you can do as far as what these are for, when you would use them, things of this sort. The main thing I would like to highlight for this initial view is this search bar here works in terms of like if you have a specific question, let's say you're asking something about how does this work in Corto, you could enter and search for Corto at that point. You don't necessarily need to have the is open tab. You may want to search stuff that has been closed, that meaning it's not being actively used. So if that's a situation you want to be able to investigate it, just get rid of the is open portion, just write search term that you're interested in, and then go ahead and search for it there at that point in time. Additionally, just because this is the internet, we do have a code of conduct in place for both the GitHub repository, but as well as the live streams, as well as the community forum itself. So it is linked within our GitHub repository. We just ask that all course participants read and adhere to the spirit of the code of conduct. I know we're all human. We're all at different points of our learning journeys. So what may seem abundantly obvious to you may not be abundantly obvious to other people. So I just ask that everybody extend each other some grace. This course is a personal passion project. It's not something we're being paid for. It's very much an attempt by us to give back to our community, and it's on a voluntary basis. So we're all working our additional regular jobs in addition to offering this course. So just if somebody's not immediately replying to your question, give it a little bit of time. Try to troubleshoot on your own, and we will drift back and be able to answer it when we have some due time. And yeah, this is linked on the actual course website itself. So that first of the mini categories is the announcements thread, and you won't be able to post to this one directly. So I've had a couple issues with the mail merge when it comes to sending emails to all the course participants. So what I've been doing is every email I send to you guys either on Sunday or Monday for each week, I'm reposting that same email under the course announcements thread. That way that we have the index of what were the emails that were sent out to all participants throughout the course, and that if, for example, you are missing it for some reason, let's say the email that you got sent ended up in the spam filter, you can still see what the contents of that email is. So the only people posting on the announcements are either going to be myself or it will be the course account posting on the announcement page. And you can kind of see, like, at least at this point in week 3, we have 3 announcements so far, and oftentimes I will go ahead and link the announcement that's here up on the upper banner portion, so it's easier to click through and be able to visualize it. The next category we have is the general chat. So this is what I envision more of if you have additional questions that you were not able to get to during the course time and you want to discuss them, but they're not actually like, help me troubleshoot this issue I'm encountering, but more or less like, how would you do XYZ thing in R? This is very much more of that general category, so you would open a discussion that would fall within this section. If you find additional resources or want to like talk about something slightly different, it's all going to be happening within the general category. And as you can see, there's multiple threads going on currently. There's both ones that we open as part of the regular course, just to like kind of funnel everybody into these chats. But then if there's something specific that you're interested in, if you want to create a new discussion, you would just go to this little green tab on the upper right side, create a new discussion, just set it for general as the category being discussed at that point. The next category we have is the ideas category, and as you may know, this is something like you thought of something that would be good to implement for the course, or other kind of like more like we should try to do this kind of suggestions. So this would be the category to use those. Currently, we don't have anything listed, so if you want to be the very first, go ahead and start your own discussion. Ideas that are relatively easy to implement, I'll try to implement as we go. Some of those that may be a little bit harder to implement, I'll keep in the background, and I'll try to see like how I can incorporate them with time. But yeah, this is an area that if you have an idea, if you think something can be improved on, go ahead and go and create a discussion on this section here. Introductions we currently have open for the very beginning of the course. It's very much trying to replicate some of those in-person dynamics that we have for the in-person part of the class that we don't really have for the online portion. So if you are just getting started, you just create your GitHub account, please go in and introduce yourself. It's currently all within a single thread, but you can start additional ones individually if you want to do so. It's very much your own community forum. You can do with it as you wish. Additionally, we will ask you sporadically to do feedback in terms of either snap polls, which is kind of what we'll be using this little tab. Later on in the course, like every third or so, we'll send out a more formal survey just to be able to evaluate what's going on, what is changing, just because this is our first year offering the course, and we want to improve on it for each subsequent class as well as in years to come. So currently, if you look at the little polls category within the discussion forum, you'll see there's my week 1 installation error pool, which is me basically just trying to survey, okay, I'm seeing all these people opening issues. Is this general? Is this just something more? We're having issues for our particular ones for showing up to the discussion thread. So if you're here, just go ahead and fill out any polls that you encounter. Now, the particular portion of the discussion stage that's been most active for these last 2 weeks has been the question and answer section, because that's where we are all currently at. We're trying to install packages, we're trying to use R for the first time, we're trying to make sure our Cordo, our Git, our Positron setups are all working properly. So we're encountering a lot of things that just because it didn't happen on my computer, as we're looking at all the other people's computers, we're going to encounter these kind of situations. So this is one of those sections where you go if you need to troubleshoot something and you're pretty sure it's something that's more on your end, not so much that it's on the course miswrote a line of code end as far as being able to edit them. So as you can see, it's quite hopping. This is definitely one of those sections where if you have a particular type of question, you can do a couple things. I have some labels. You can kind of see these right here, where it'll be like for week 1 or workstation setup or the particular piece of software being used. You can try filtering by label to see if you're able to find a similar question, which you can jump on at that point in time. Or if you just want to go and jump straight to it, you can just get rid of this portion of suggestions, which are kind of like filtering what you see here, and just enter what you're trying to look up. Let's say you're looking up how to use Cordo. You could enter Cordo within the search bar, hit enter, and then that will filter for some of the options of the ongoing threads. So I would say before you open a new Q&A section, just kind of check to see if your question has already been answered. We haven't encountered it much this week, but I anticipate it to become a little bit more frequent just because the kind of issues we'll encounter as we go further in the course are more likely to be similar. So if I have answered one person, what I will end up doing if another thread comes up asking the exact same question, I'll just end up linking the URL to that initial explanation. That way we're not duplicating effort in terms of answering questions over time. Now, the thing that's useful, especially if you do open a Q&A discussion thread, is I'm not on your computer. I'm not able to see what you're able to see. And generally, when it comes to R, it's not good to just copy and paste the terminal output because it's many, many lines of code, and it quickly will fill up the actual discussion forum page, and it doesn't keep the highlighting as far as the color and other cues as far as like what might be wrong with that particular one. So my recommendation is not so much copy the particular error you see, but take a screenshot of the error you're seeing or the warning message, and then attach that screenshot to your discussion post. That way I can see what's there. I can get at least context of what it is. If I need to look up a error or a warning, I'm generally not copying the entire thing into like Google search. I'll generally take the keywords from it because Google is not going to be searching for your particular computer's file path or your particular package. I'll be looking for similar kind of questions asked about different packages, different people's computers. So those are the elements that we should encourage. Also, if you do have like a particular line of code that's failing, it's perfectly fine to include that within it. The way you would do this, if you wanted to see, for example, insert a code block within a discussion page, it's 4 tick marks in a row, so not 3 tick marks we normally do for our code block chunk. So it's 4 tick marks in a row, then whatever lines of code you want, and then at the very end, an additional 4 tick marks at the end. So I'll show an example of this and I'll update the documentation just so that's a little bit clearer as we go forward. So this is my example. I was replying to an issue with package installation. Part of it was I had mistyped some of the install commands within that first set of challenge of 20 things we're trying to learn from. But then this is the example of those 4 tick marks in a row, lines of code, and then 4 tick marks in a row. This gives you the option of just being able to come in here, click, and then at that point you have copied the code that you need to run, and then I can open it in Positron, copy and paste, and we'll be ready to go at that section in time. Now, show and tell is the funner one, and it hasn't had much use just because we're at the very beginning of the course. But sometimes you place a lot of effort, and then you get a really cool graph, and you want to be able to show your data. So this is very much that section. You could use it in general as well, but it's the place you go. Not only is the discussion forum where we celebrate our wins, it's also where we complain about things. So this is the celebrate your wins portion of the community forum itself. So for example, the current one that I have is one I did over the weekend where I had a question related to what we're doing with the bioconductor package installations. Part of our take-home question was, how many bioconductor packages exist in GitHub. So around that point in time, I was a little bit curious about how many previously flow cytometry related packages had been in bioconductor but have since been discontinued just because they have been deprecated. So in messing around with trying to get that data set out of bioconductor, I also ended up just getting all that same information about how long has each flow cytometry package been in bioconductor. So I ultimately generated what was a pretty cool figure, just basically showing what's the oldest cytometry package in bioconductor versus what's the newest and how many years it has been part of that project. So this was a pretty cool as far as both the data manipulation to get to this graph, but then also the graph itself. And it's not something I've encountered anywhere else on the internet, so this is where I decided, hey, this was one of my wins for that particular day. I'm just going to show you guys, like, I think this data is pretty cool, and I think this graph can be tinkered with because it's not the most aesthetically pleasing graph, but it's still pretty cool nonetheless. So this is where you'd go for the show and tell category. Now, in the other sections outside the discussion forum, there's two other ways that you can reach out if you have questions. So the Q&A section is where if you think it's going to be something that's definitely related to something you are doing wrong, but we're all human when it comes to writing things for the website and for this course. I will make typos sporadically, but then oftentimes something that I'll write out as code may definitely not work. So I'm trying my best when it comes to checking all three operating systems, both Windows, Mac, and Linux, for the code that we're running at a given particular section of time. But sometimes some of this may come true, and you may get an error that affects the majority of the class. So this is one of those sections where it's not something that you individually can fix. It's more of a situation that David, being myself, needs to go and update the documentation on the website so that none of us continue doing the same mistake over and over again. So it's one of those sections, for example, if you've been looking at the Q&A page currently, you'll see that there's a discussion about how to actually push the local repository you make as part of the Git walkthrough to your GitHub account. It's working for quite a few people as written, but for some reason, for some of us, it's not quite working when it comes to actually being able to publish and then push the data stage. So that's one of those sections that I will need to work on the documentation at some point just to make it clear. And then also at the very beginning of the course, I didn't have screenshots for a couple steps that happen for Mac install when it comes to the command line tools because my Mac already had it installed. So I opened an issue at that point of requesting if anybody has this issue, please take screenshots and I will update the documentation. So oftentimes if you look at the little issues tab, which is a couple over from where we have on the discussion, it'll be very much David's to-do list of things that I noticed that are wrong that need to be corrected. But if you encounter something that's definitely not a you kind of bug, but it's definitely David miswrote the code bug, feel free to open that as a new issue. If you have an idea that you want to contribute to, like an actual documentation of something, this would also potentially be an issue. It's not something we're going to maneuver so much right now, but as we get towards the later end of the course, we will likely have a few extra lessons that will be the package maintainers offering a more thorough explanation of how to use their package. So these kind of one-offs would start off as an open issue, and then we'd address and bring in that data set for the explainers as we went. This is most of the same kind of content. So this is an example of what we're seeing here. This was the request of screenshots as far as the Mac OS, as far as the documentation of how to set up the Xcode command line tools. So ultimately, I posted this, and then after the course opened, Jen came in and graciously provided the screenshots, at which point I used them to update the documentation. So thank you, Jen, for that. We now have a much better explanation of how to do the git install via the Xcode tools via the command line for Mac. Alright, I think I went through most of this. So the very last part of this pre-course walkthrough is talking about the optional take-home problems. So these are meant mainly at giving you a less catered experience as far as being able to work with them and figure out stuff about your own data sets in R that's not so carefully curated. So this is where you will be exploring beyond the boundaries of what I have been able to test. So oftentimes this will be kind of like the cycles of trying something, failing, repeating it again until you get it to work. So my goal of these take-home problems, and they're optional, is what I will continue to emphasize, is it's trying to get you to be able to troubleshoot things as you go, try to build some of this coding mindset that it may not be quite as easy to gather from just listening to a lecture once a week. So these are kind of reach goals for most of them. They get progressively harder with each question. But if you have completed them and you would like, hey, this is what I did, this is what I would like to get some additional feedback on, you can discuss the take-home problems on the general discussion thread on the discussion forum. But if you want more personalized like comments from the course instructors, what you can do is submit these optional take-home problems as a pull request to the homework branch of our GitHub course repository, at which point I'll come in, I'll provide additional feedback. If there's something that's not quite working, I'll request that you revise these submitted pull requests until you have it in such a state that we can actually bring it in and it'll be present within the homework branch for later use. So I'll explain some of this as we go. It's a little bit more on the advanced side, but it's a good mechanism as far as learning a little bit more of these aspects of how to use Git and GitHub that you wouldn't encounter generally at the very get-go. And then also it's something that you can contribute to this to the Cytometry in our course project and get credit for it later on at the end of the course. This is basically my description. So the very first step, if you're going to submit the optional take-home problems, is you should go ahead and sync your fork. So I know I've covered this a couple times over the last couple weeks, but if you open up the forked version of the Cytometry in R project that you have, if you're behind, let's say I have updated the website and sent in the next week material, you'll see that your branch will show something like 3 commits behind the actual main branch. So if you're getting ready to submit a optional take-home problems as a pull request, you need to make sure you're kind of as close to as recent with my branch, just to avoid being able to have any accidental merge issues. So at that point, what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and hit that sync fork option. It's going to come up with telling you that, yes, your branch is out of date. You can look at it and compare it if you wanted to, but the main thing you're trying to do at this point is just update the branch, which is basically bringing in all those changes that have happened on my end to your copy that's present under your GitHub account, so it's able to be used at that point in time. And then at that point, you have synced your branch. So everything on the remote, meaning your GitHub account, is now up to date with where we are at currently in the course. The next step is kind of what we did for the second week of the course is basically we're going to need to pull that data into your local computer. So we'd reopen Positron at that point and just go ahead and do the pull option, kind of what we saw during the Git walkthrough, and just bring all those changes locally to your own account at that stage. So the emphasis for this portion is the challenging thing is we don't want you to be modifying files that are related to the course website or adding files X in other spots that will conflict with other people when they are trying to send in their own homeworks. So what I'm doing is under every week, so like week 1 was installing our packages, week 2 is the file paths, week 3 will be like inside an FCS file. Within each of those folders within the course, there's a little homework folder. And then what I want you to basically do is create a folder within that homework folder with your own account name. That way, any changes that you are adding to or modifying are happening within an isolated environment where no matter what anybody else is doing, it's not going to affect the ability of bringing in your optional take-home problems and being able to actually look at them. So that's the challenging part as far as making sure it's in the correct folder. So we'll be seeing that in the next couple screenshots. So if you're looking at the recently pulled in data for cytometry in R, this was the example we had for week 1. So you can kind of see within the general course folder of your forked version, the carbon copy, you have the course folder itself, not the documents, which is the rendered website view. And under course folder, you'll have each week's new material get added. So if we are submitting the optional take-home problems for week 1, we'll go to week 1, installing our packages, and then we see right in there's a homeworks folder. That homeworks folder, the only thing it has present is a README file, just giving a little bit of description of how to actually use this. And at that point, what you're going to be doing is you're basically creating your own folder within there. So in my case, my GitHub user account name is David Rock. I want you to use whatever your GitHub user account name is and create your own folder within homeworks for the respective date. And then at that point, you can add as many files that you want to add in as you want at that point. So we kind of emphasize keeping things organized. So if you have a subfolder for data, include the data folder there. Try to keep it, remember each file that you submit has to be less than 50 megabytes. You can't submit your very large FCS files. I don't particularly want to crowd up the GitHub with like 1 gigabyte size FCS files, so keep it on the relatively small side. Images are for like if you take screenshots and you integrate those screenshots in your Corto document, this is where they would be at. And then the main thing I'm emphasizing is have it as a Corto document. include the Corel Markdown document itself, because then that way I can just copy and paste your folder into my computer, just run it as is, as its own little local project, and then it should all be able to compile and generate the figure that you actually are intending and what you see on your side. So that's kind of the goal, keeping everything within your local name file under the homeworks folder. And then ultimately, when you're rendering, what it'll look like on my end is ultimately there'll be your particular folder that's homeworks. And then once I regenerate the website, it's also going to be isolated within your own particular folder under the website itself. So this way, it doesn't matter if next person, Mulan Detal or John Doe comes in and makes their own folders, they'll all be isolated within their own folders at that section of time, and you won't have to worry about it. And then the most important thing at this point is you have brought in all the changes from Cytometry and R that I have pushed to the previous project. You've created your own folder and placed all the objects within that folder. To be able to send it back to me and so that I'm able to know there has been a change that occurred, at this point you need to make one commit. So basically just stage all the files that got added as part of your own commit. Write a little commit message saying what you did, hit commit, and then at that point, go ahead and push those changes to your GitHub account as far as your own Cytometry in R folder. So this would be via sync changes, or if you're doing it via the terminal, it would be git pushed in that case. At that point, circle back and check. If you see there has been an additional update because I have been correcting things, just go ahead and sync it again. It shouldn't affect anything as long as all your files are still present within your subfolder under the homeworks under the respective date. And then at that point, just hit update branch. And at this point, you're all ready to go as far as submitting the optional take-home problems to us. Now, the main thing that you need to do is you're not submitting it to our main branch. So if you're looking at, like, for example, our folder up here, it's located within main. There's actually two branches currently. There's the homeworks branch, which I think is currently labeled as week 1, and then there's the main branch. So the main branch is the one that's producing the active websites. It's the one that everyone's bringing in. So you don't actually submit to this branch. You're submitting to the parallel branch, which is the homework branch, where even if something is messed up as far as merging it, we're not losing any files, we're not losing any web pages, we're not causing issues to other people's systems. So most important thing when you're submitting the pull request is to please submit it to the homeworks branch. So if you hit the option, let me go here. This is where the documentation could have used a couple additional things. If you are on our homework branch and you see that we are here, you have the option of initiating a pull request. The other option would be from that pull request tab that's present on top of the GitHub repository. And what happens when you open the pull request, you kind of see this is the current view, where this is the changes that have happened as far as the last couple things. You can see you have the option of selecting which branch is being merged to. So in this case, this was my own personal account. This was my forked version of the Cytometry in R project. It's currently set to try to merge into the main branch of the Flowcore Cytometry in R folder. This is what we're trying to avoid. So it's this section here where you'd be switching it out, and you'd be switching it over to that homework branch for your respective week as far as being able to submit it. And then at this point, you're basically saying, hey, this new change I had done as a commit that includes my homework folder, I want to bring this into the homework branch of the main project, at which point you would go ahead and select the create the pull request option. So at this point, when you open a pull request, it double checks once again, are you at where you want to send things? So in this case, we're sending it from my forked version of the project to the homework branch of the main project itself. And then at that point, just provide a brief explanation, basically saying this is for week 1, this is for week 2, whatever the week of the homework is. Give a little bit extra detail as far as what you're doing. So if something wasn't quite clear, if you want additional feedback there, this is kind of the section where you're basically writing an email to me. So this is where I will be able to feedback. And then at that point, you're just go ahead and go down here and you'll create a pull request. At which point, I'll get a notification on my side. And what you're basically going to end up seeing is your submission. When I'm opening it on my end and I'm looking at it, I'll see that, yes, you have done a submission. I'll see the commits that have happened. I'll be able to see the files that you have changed. The very first step I will do is just check the homeworks folder to make sure that everything is in the correct folder. There's no accidental copy and pasting of anything else anywhere else in the course. And then at that point, I will assign somebody as a reviewer. I'll put the label for which week it's being done. I'll give you a comment of a general timeline of when I expect to be able to review your submitted optional take-homes. And then at that point, you'll get a situation where if everything is good, I will tell you, for example, everything looks good. I'm going to proceed with the merge. And then I'm just going to be able to merge in the branch, which will ultimately not load very much for now. You'll still be able to, like, if you look at the homework branch and circle back to it, you'll be able to see who has submitted homeworks for what particular week. But ultimately, my goal is after the course has completed and we're no longer actively using the main branch, I'm going to bring in everybody's homeworks from that homework branch and into the main project itself, at which point, in terms of GitHub, you'd be credited as a contributor to the actual project itself, so you would have contributed to the Cytometry and R course, so you will additionally get credit in terms of GitHub itself as far as having contributed to an open source project. So that's kind of the goal as far as the optional take-home problems go. You don't have to make your optional take-home problems perfect. This is just more as this is the kind of things that beginners who were just starting off doing Cytometry and R were encountering. This is how they changed over time. So that's kind of the idea as far as why I'm using this pull request as the method to submit the optional take-homes. The additional one was I didn't want to have to deal with the 400 emails being sent to the Flowcore email address and trying to remember who have I followed up with, who I need to follow up with. Having it on GitHub is a much better organized way of being able to monitor things. So in conclusion, we've gone through different avenues as far as getting help, both in terms of how to use the different categories within the discussion forum, as well as when you would actually open an issue on the GitHub repository itself, and then some a bit of the description of how to use the pull request feature to be able to submit pull requests to submit your optional take-home problems. So there's a couple sections still in our pre-course walkthrough that we need to go through. The next one I'll be recording today is talking how to use Floriada, which is one of those open, it's one of those free softwares that's available as a web browser that you're able to do some of the basic gating that you would be able to do in FlowJo, FCS Express, or similar kind of commercial software when it comes to gating things manually. The main reason we'll be covering this in the course is there's a module starting around week 5 where we rely on an R package called CytoML to bring in data sets from FlowJo. But I don't feel it's appropriate, given that this is a free Cytometry and R course, to then make you go and sign up for a free trial or pay a license just to be able to try out does this R package work as we intended. So Floriada has a workaround to let you do the same kind of procedure. So that walkthrough is very much focused on if you don't already have FlowJo and you want to be able to follow along, this is what will be done. And then I have a pre-course walkthrough as far as like how to use AI appropriately in the context of this course. That's not yet up on the website, but I'm hoping to have it within the next week or so. There's a few additional resources, kind of like what we do for most of the pre-course walkthroughs, as well as each of the week of the course. There's an introduction as far as the GitHub community discussions forum, and then also a little bit of context as far as how to do this pull request thing, just because that's something that's not particularly directly familiar to many people just getting started off. So this is just additional resources if you're curious. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention for the single concurrent video viewer who has been with us for this entire time. And I will see you at some point throughout the week for one of the live streams. Thank you.